This is the tale of how I started unseeing things and unfeeling my body. Whenever I throw the 3 coins, the oracle suggests me to stop. No matter what I am doing, the hexagram always tells me that I should withdraw, refrain, retreat. In the first morning of the year, the I Ching read soon, the conflict. No mutating lines, crystal clear, the conflict was the grand opening of my 2020.
Conflict. You are sincere and are being obstructed. A cautious hold halfway brings good fortune. Going through to the end brings misfortune. It bothers one to see the great man. It does not bother one to cross the great water.
And as it turned out, I didn't follow the advice. The following 2 weeks, I kept myself busy with my average pay job, friends and peers, seminars and workshops I returned to attend, happy to feel I was starting to take hold of my old life again. Also, I wanted to dance. No hookups, no fast love, just dance. I went to this party downtown. The place was packed, literally. The parties pressed onto each other, one could barely move. At the beginning I found it fun, but after a while slipping through the gaps between wet parties to reach the bar turned to be a bit uncomfortable. Sexy, but uncomfortable. I booked a taxi home. I woke up and I couldn't feel the toes of my right foot. I met Roberto for a movie and a pizza. Nice evening catching up. My pace was slow and insecure. The morning after, I couldn't feel my toes on the other foot too. I limped to my therapist. I planned some strategies to avoid climbing the stairs to his studio, but the lift was out of service. The following days, 2 fingers on both my hands felt numb. I invited the buddy over. He grinned, kissed me, and guided my hands down to his crotch. Sex is a wonderful painkiller, but as soon as he left through the main door, back he came in through the back door, as if a giant spider was burning under my skin and I could feel the grip of her legs clutching my spine into fetal position. It would not go away, keeping me awake for about a week. I was surprised that my neighbor was insomniac as well. I could hear her chatting through the walls. Friends started visiting me that week, and so did my brother and his wife. They would bring me food. The conversation about my brother's symptoms 3 years earlier was off the table. But I said, we knew it, just couldn't tell to each other. My immune and my peripheral nervous systems were in conflict. My nerves were failing under the attack of my own body.
I think it's Guillain-Barré. John, translation. It's a rare form of paralysis. It starts in the feet and the legs, usually, and it climbs. Nobody knows what causes it, and lots of times it goes away completely. The only real risk is to his respiratory system. If the paralysis advances enough to impede breathing,
Yes?
then they'll perform a tracheotomy.
It's that serious? What do the doctors say? What can they do?
Nothing. It's like watching somebody sink in quicksand.
You don't really ask patients who are scheduled for MRI if they're claustrophobic. You just ask them if they're into industrial music. MRI, ER, EMG, CAT, a rearranged alphabet of power and uncertainty. Each acronym has its own sound, rhythm, technology, and knowledge. Yellow wristband. I sit several hours at the ER covering several shifts, or several doctors would severally ask me if I suffer from anxiety, rage. Now, how is that possible that anxiety could get me into that? Why is that I cannot call in sick at work anytime I feel overwhelmed? Why is normallife.com not accountable for anxiety and now I am individually accounted for my own share? Is it there and not there? At your convenience, is it some sort of Schrodinger's cat anxiety? Eventually, the objective test.
I parametri sembrano compatibili.
Wait, what? That was it. I melted into tears. I was so relieved that I knew it'd be over in a couple of months. Aha! if I look back. But my worst fears of being alone could not be unspoken nor unseen any longer. They were sound and vision to me now. HELP, LP, lumbar puncture, yet another acronym, but no sound and no vision whatsoever. It was not that painful, but a feeling of a needle entering my core liquefied me into cold sweat. The nurse pressed my face onto her generous bosom. I passed out, exhausted. I was officially off the map that day. The outer world became invisible to me, and so did I to it. This is the tale of how I learned seeing things and feeling my body back. Yes, I reckon this is a pornographic account of what have happened. But what's pornography if not looking bluntly and closely into what is normally inaccessible and private, a dip into somebody else's intimacy? And well, if you have listened until now, then we are getting intimate, somehow bonded. And bonded was I on my hospital bed by the invisible strings of the illness and by the all-too-visible drips. I was mainly looked after by my sister-in-law and my mom in shifts. I texted my exes and a few friends. The response was wider than I had expected, and it came with a massive amount of chocolate. Chocolate in all colors, shapes, and states of the matter. The top of the class that I am, I tried to stick to the hospital diet, but then I could not resist diving into a sea of sanguinaccio sailing on boats of chiacchiere past butter biscuits rocks and heart-shaped islands. While an archipelago of unexpected care and affection emerged, I let myself drown into its waters, carefree. Suddenly, I got rid of all my restraints about how to maintain relationships, what is adequate sharing, what is healthier letting go. I learned to value the care of those ones who showed up. I didn't blame the ones who didn't. I was no center of the world anyhow. As the level of proteins in my spine raised, my neurosis dropped. Now, being a single man who was not able to do the basics, I felt grateful that I could benefit the stay in a rehabilitation facility provided by the state. Nina would gently shout, Robby, è questo il patto sociale. This is the social pact. Enjoy till it lasts. If the hospital was a lilac island of calm and silence, the rehab center was a tutti-frutti nightmare of chatter and noise. Like in a stock exchange market, people would be shouting all day, TV screens would be flickering everywhere. Life was knocking at my door in the form of afternoon TV talks and reality shows. The strict routine made me feel like I was something to be fixed and reworked as in a factory line. 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. to produce the refurbished version of myself. Dani would visit me after work. One day she literally pushed me to the quote-unquote nice garden of the center, which was in fact a squalid parking lot for visitors and workers. But as soon as I could afford the stairs, that place became my good place. I grew fond of the decoration flowers, cascading rosemaries, lavender bushes, purple daisies, brown narcissuses, and shy jasmines. The apricot trees of the neighboring field were dressed in white blossoms in a weirdly warm February. The camera roll revealed I was obsessed with a specific tree. I also took quite a few selfies to say that I was blossoming as well, but I left the sandaness corridors of the center out of my digital memory. I celebrated my birthday on wheels. The TV in the background was blabbering about a virus similar to SARS spreading fast in China. I could really not understand the hassle. It's just a regular flu. data say. Well, xenophobia outbreak spread well before the first COVID case in Italy. By my mother's birthday, I was already ambulating and uncomfortable that she would visit me again. In a matter of a week, Italy was in lockdown. Visiting hours were restricted to 10 minutes per patient stops, and some days later they were completely forbidden. Oh fuck, this is really happening, isn't it? Desperate workers and students are coming back to their families on the last ring. Outbursts are occurring in prisons all over the country. The hospitalized are severed from their people. We are living the ideal city dystopia where nobody, well, except the homeless, of course, is up there. The world has suddenly shrunk.
Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same.
And this is the tale of us all withdrawing into our tiny private spaces framed by the floor box of conferencing apps. My roommate was panicking that the virus could get into the rehab center, which I later discovered it finally did, and that he'd rather be a cripple home than dead away from his wife. I couldn't stand his tone, but his anguish was doing the dirty job for me in processing it all. I will sound a bit cynical, but you're lucky if you're sitting next to someone who's afraid of flying. It helps you decenter and stay still while the whole plane is shaking. The virus swallowed up reality at the extent there was no outside out of the rehab center. Despite being aware of this, I joyfully counted down to the day I'd be dismissed by picking a song each day with a relative number in the title and shared it on Facebook. Scrolling down my feed, I learned that Stefano made it all the way from Shanghai and Salvatore was recovering from his second brain surgery. This news came as a shock to me. Despite being in contact with my birth family and my chosen ones, I had not been realizing I was sick during a pandemic. I only got it when I saw Oriana's video log from the hospital. 7 years earlier, Oriana and Salvatore had transformed the process of his cure in a collective digital art performance about care by hacking the code of proprietary medical data open. Cure and care happened to be the same word in Italian, simply la cura. They couldn't have phrased it better. The patient is never the only one diseased. It is the entire society in solidarity among all. And that was even truer in this case. Now, I've learned to speak the lingo of the doctor. I've named the symptoms correctly. I've dealt with the procedures coldly. I've read data accurately. Faking it is something that is none of my concern. Stay still, behave, plus up, make yourself a believable subject. Don't say numb, don't say can't move. Say paresthesias, say hyposthenia instead. Whether we're talking about COVID or GBS, reading the data is managing the language. Mastering the language is governing the pandemic. Except, viremia was faster than the knowledge we had of the virus. So, data chaotically came across all media and the interpretation backed this or that philosophy of intervention. In Salvatore's terms, data are the terrain of the conflict, a conflict which is invisible otherwise. Data are not to be seen as crude oil to be read or extracted, but an existential efflorescence. We blossom data on the go. It's early June. Lockdown is definitely over. Today, I went back to the rehab facility to withdraw the medical records that will adapt to the one provided by the hospital. The parking lot is in full flowering. The apricot tree is covered with bright green leaves. A gentle and warm breeze sweeps across the companion countryside. I am nervous, but not as nervous as I expected to be. 22 fellow patients got infected. 4 had died. The lady who would ask for snacks from the machine is now standing in front of me, queuing for her own record. She doesn't recognize me without my training suit. Back to my place, I stare at this double 80-something pages dossier that translates this story into numbers. This is to certify that I have visited Mr. Terracciano, who is affected with Dyspneic tetrapolyradiculus neuritis, aka GBS. I might be disabled, but I don't feel like one. And well, on a second thought, for the time being, or for a longer period, that might be true. I am that too. Every fucking movement I made, every step I gave, someone watched over me and reported. Neurologic tests with points assigned, ability to poo and pee, to flip over, to sit, to eat, blood pressure, temperature, everything. Data, data, data. My disease produced shitloads of paperwork. Going through the pages, I realized the outer gaze over my body, as if it were somehow more objective and truer than my memories, as the cause of the disease had been harder and more painful than I had experienced. As if I had forgotten something and now I had it rubbed in my face. That is called denial and repression, you dumb buzz. In those pages, I could read how my personal curve had increased and then flattened. When something like this happens, you need to find a key to decode chaos, lol. And in the best scenario, you do it by making up a lesson you will have learned in the end, by turning your disease into a metaphor. We all do it. I mean, look at the coronavirus. Some metaphors were critical, some instrumental, some plain stupid. So I wonder, what is more harmful, the usage of the wrong metaphor or the deployment of metaphors at all? I had multiple metaphors for GPS. A prolonged disquiet over life choices that brought me to a full paralysis, a misperception of reality embodied by a complete sensory loss, but above all, a lingering overprotection of the self that translated self-sabotage into autoimmunity. But what about COVID? Is it an anti-capitalist virus? Is it the virus of the capital?
Io non lo so, diciamo, ho un po' di resistenza a pensare la malattia come una metafora.
She is Nina Mahabi, a trans feminist and Terona activist and researcher.
Perché mi sembra un po' come le conclusioni delle favole, no? Cioè dove vinceva sempre la formica che era una gran stronza, oppure si imparava da quest'aquila che lasciava la tartaruga e la faceva schiattare al suolo così.
Maybe she's right. We do not need cruel pedagogies. We don't need to learn from the catastrophe. Maybe this quest for metaphors is futile.
Si apprenda soltanto nella crudeltà, in delle lezioni definitive e crudeli, appunto. Cioè, spero in altre pedagogie per la mia esistenza. E credo, diciamo, che anche l'esperienza della malattia sia molto esplorata, percorsa, attraversata sia dal femminismo che dalle scritture froce, un po' perché la scrittura froce ha dovuto conoscere, pensare, raccontare la peste, l'AIDS. Pensavo a Susan Sontag, a Audre Lorde, no? A Sedgwick, tutte queste femministe che hanno dovuto raccontare che cosa ha fatto sul loro corpo la malattia e in che modo è cambiata la loro relazione con il loro corpo. La questione delle relazioni è proprio cambiata. Cioè, per esempio, c'è questa cosa molto bella di Sedgwick.
What is far more interesting is looking at the issues that the pandemic brought out of the realm of invisibility. We've gone through other silent pandemics, and while science, politics, and the politics of science are making their curse, the most vulnerable of us have learned the reality of the limit, and with that, the ability to lean onto each other, to question and desire, to question as desire.
Un piano metaforico, ma piuttosto è un piano in cui cioè quello che si poteva nascondere in delle pieghe non si può più nascondere, cioè in cui delle cose si rendono assolutamente manifeste.
For a very short time frame, the privileged part of the world too has been forced to see and question practically every aspect of life in this phase of capitalism. The power trip experienced by a capricious Western world has been interrupted by a reality check that opened up questions on ecological sustainability, on gender pay gap, on patriarchal toxic relations, on racial discriminations, hospitality and migrants' working conditions, on universal welfare, on total institutions, on education, on social and affective precarization. All of that distress that we sublimed in the act of care, better known as baking.
Black Lives Matter, cioè, ha buttato giù le statue mentre noi stavamo ancora a cercare di riprenderci dal Covid e là sta ammazzando ancora gente, no? E non stanno ancora
And
in
while the
blocco.
dough was rising, Black Lives Matter was tearing down the statues and taking the streets, questioning all narratives and demanding to defund police, to invest on healthcare and
la
education
salute
instead.
pubblica, cioè poter dire non abbiamo fatto un cazzo, abbiamo perso. Io non la voglio raccontare necessariamente così, perché probabilmente questo è il racconto di chi è uscito da casa ma sta ancora nel ventre in putrefazione del capitalismo. Noi eravamo nelle nostre case e dentro questo bozzolo eravamo lì e pensavamo, sognavamo, immaginavamo il mondo che c'era
Baking.
fuori.
Our favorite pastime during quarantine. It fermented the boredom and turned it into wait, expectation, imagination. Nina tells me of Diapos, a video art piece made by Didrekio for the Institute of Queer Ecology in Miami. The flickering vision of alien eyes witnesses the spaces of human interaction devoid of its life. It is a fantasy of the spaces for our species surviving us, but also an exercise in practical imagination.
Il punto però è che quello che c'era fuori non si creava da solo, dipendeva molto da quello che noi eravamo capaci non di costruire, ma di immaginare in quel momento che si potesse fare. E credo che quello è stato un momento, diciamo, di un potenziale di grande radicalità dell'immaginazione, perché non serviva, diciamo, di aver frequentato i collettivi militanti per poter dire abbiamo bisogno di un reddito universale, che tutti lo devono avere, perché tutti devono poter avere un posto sicuro dove poter tornare, il piatto a tavola, anche se non possono lavorare.
Diapos is not a metaphor. It's a figuration, a period of apparent slumber, acquiescence in some non-human species. Looking at the lockdown through this diffraction, I see the mutual acts of care and the suspension of the touch. L'attesa, the wait. In another reading of the hexagram, the image is a play of free association, not only for the reader, but also with the previous and the subsequent hexagram, waiting to go out, waiting for this year to be over, waiting to be back on my feet, waiting to go outside, or simply waiting till the outer conditions are sustainable. At first, I felt the conflict between the thought of tough physical distancing being the only way to break the chain of contagion and the persistent thought of an autoimmune reaction of the social body, rejecting its own other and shutting down the inside. A body without bond, a dear friend turning away in the time of need. Back to when COVID was the news of distant China, I texted Stefano, living in Shanghai. He told me that despite his political distance from the Black Mirror scenario, we couldn't understand the damage there in the West, and that self-isolation was the most effective way to hammer down the curve. Certainly, I could not understand. The thought of him being infected with some sort of propaganda daunted me for a sec, but I was not there until there became here. Finally, the idea that society was to be protected before the individual was some serious shit we'd have had to deal with and made me reconsider. COVID was extremely real for everybody. GPS was extremely real for me. We could do without metaphors. There is no meaning to carry on the other side of reality. Emergencies were actual, and so were the consequences of human withdrawal. If there's a promise or a bond that keeps a body together, then you must accept the chance that the other inside of me might be a threat of disgregation. And that is perfectly okay. In this delicate conflict, the ability to be infected defines who I am biologically, psychologically, politically. It puts me in contact with my innermost vulnerable side, making me a guardian of a door that must be left ajar. My vulnerability takes the scene and asks to be the foundation for future choices. Contagion touches us all at a distance. It runs and wakes us up in a world in which everybody is entangled. We are vulnerable opposites on the spectrum of vulnerability. Me, you, China, the South, the autoimmune, the immunodeficient. No matter where we are, we're always touching the underground wires. The Conflict, or Living with Another Disease, is a one-episode podcast made by me, Roberto Terracciano, for the Butik Collective's project Ti do la mia parola. All sounds are original except Technologic by The Daft Punk, Little Boxes by Malvina Reynolds, and The Past is a Grotesque Animal by Of Montreal. It also includes a sample from Channel 4's 1998 show Amistad Maupin's More Tales of the City. I would like to thank Nina Ferrante for taking part in this project, and for the always insightful chats, gossip, and laughs. Oriana Persico and Salvatore Iaconesi for being such a great inspiration to me. Stefano for scattering my thoughts. I owe you one more burger. Carmine for the whispering. Spiros for destroying my hissing fauna, the patient, and the final master. And finally, Eva, Alice, and Alice at the Butik Collective for giving me their word. I dedicate this podcast to Alessandra, Maria Domenica, Alice, Roberto, and my brother, Claudio. The Conflict is available at tidolamiaparola-butik.com.